Hollywood was never really run by the stars. It was run by men who knew how to make people disappear. Behind every glittering studio gate, shadows moved with the power to make or break legends. But who were the real bosses of Tinseltown's golden age? Did the studios answer to creative vision or to the rules of the underworld? Tonight, we peel back the curtain on the silent kingpins whose reach went far beyond the credits, sometimes in ways no one dared admit. 1. Eddie Manx, MGM. In classic Hollywood, few names provoked more quiet dread than Eddie Manx, a man who held no Oscars, commanded no camera, yet could end a career, erase a scandal, or make a body disappear with a single phone call. To the public, he was just the general manager of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a hulking figure always seen hovering behind the studio's golden boy mogul, Louis B. Mayer. But in the backlots and smoky offices of MGM, Manx was more than a suit. He was the studio's own mobster, operating in plain sight with a blend of charm, brutality, and unbreakable loyalty to the studio above all. Born Joseph Edgar Allen John Manx to Irish immigrants, Eddie's path to power didn't begin in Hollywood, but in the rough amusement parks of New Jersey, where he learned to deal with trouble by force or bribe. When the Shank brothers, East Coast business moguls with underworld ties, sent him west to keep an eye on their investments at MGM, they unknowingly unleashed Hollywood's most effective fixer. The studios may have been built on dreams, but Manx made sure nightmares never got out to the press. Eddie Manx's real job was simple: protect the studio's interests at any cost. He read all the stars' mail, eavesdropped on conversations, and maintained thick files on every major player under the MGM banner. Nothing happened on the lot, be it an affair, a brawl, or a business betrayal without Manx knowing. If a studio star ran afoul of the law, Manx made sure the police, the hospitals, and the papers played along. If a secret threatened to leak, Manx would pay, intimidate, or, in rare cases, arrange for violence to keep it buried. His signature fixes are legendary, both for their efficiency and ruthlessness. When Joan Crawford's early nude film threatened her career, Manx tracked down the negatives with relentless focus. Rumor says he spent up to $100,000 in studio money. Some claim he even sent goons from New Jersey to negotiate the price down. Crawford herself left a $50,000 check at MGM when her contract ended, a quiet thank you, or perhaps a final payoff for Manx's silence. But not all fixes were just about money. Manx's personal life bled into his professional sphere with lethal consequences. When aspiring actress Mary Nolan ended their affair and threatened to expose his infidelities, Manx didn't just have her blacklisted. He beat her so brutally that Nolan wore dark glasses on set, and the damage to her reputation, engineered through studio gossip and pressure, drove her from Hollywood. She died at 45, ruined and forgotten, another casualty of Manx's need to keep the studio's secrets safe. Perhaps the darkest chapter came with the 1937 rape of Patricia Douglas, a young extra lured to an MGM party and assaulted by a studio executive. Manx, fearing scandal, orchestrated a cover-up so complete that evidence vanished, witnesses changed their stories, and the DA, who owed his position to MGM, ensured no charges were filed. For decades, Douglas's story was dismissed as fantasy, a testament to the power Manx wielded with a smile and a threat. In the world of classic Hollywood, Eddie Manx blurred the lines between fixer and mobster, lawman and criminal. He kept MGM's image sparkling, but the cost was paid in ruined lives, broken bodies, and secrets that would take decades to surface. If Hollywood was a dream factory, Manx was its nightmare, the shadow that made sure the only star at MGM was Leo the Lion, and everyone else was just passing through. 2. Johnny Rosselli. While Hollywood moguls relished the spotlight, Johnny Rosselli worked strictly in the shadows, earning a reputation as the Chicago outfit's quiet kingmaker in Tinseltown. To studio bosses and starlets, he was just another sharp-dressed businessman, always ready with a grin and a generous tab at the bar. But insiders knew better. When labor strikes erupted, when union organizers suddenly changed their tune, or when a studio executive needed a problem to simply go away, it was usually Rosselli pulling the strings, leaving no fingerprints behind. Rosselli's journey to Hollywood power began not with movies, but with the mob. Born Filippo Sacco, he changed his name to Johnny Rosselli to sound more American and more Hollywood. By the late 1920s, Rosselli was already a trusted enforcer for Al Capone's Chicago outfit, specializing in union racketeering, extortion, and high-stakes gambling. As the Great Depression deepened, Hollywood's exploding film industry became a prime target for organized crime, flush with money, and more importantly, reliant on unions that could shut a set down with a single walkout. Rosselli saw an opportunity. He quickly inserted himself into Hollywood's labor movements, quietly taking over unions representing projectionists, stagehands, and extras. With the threat of strikes always looming, Rosselli and the outfit could extort the studios for labor peace. Pay up, and your blockbuster could finish shooting on time. Refuse, and you'd find your sets empty, your stars idling, and your release dates in jeopardy. MGM, Paramount, and Columbia were none immune, and all quietly funneled money through Rosselli's shadow accounts. The studios learned early, when Rosselli came knocking, it was better to pay than to fight. Rosselli's reach didn't end with labor. He ran Hollywood's underground gambling dens and prostitution rings, providing stars and executives with forbidden pleasures, and then keeping records that could be used for blackmail. These secrets were as valuable as gold. A star caught in a compromising position would soon find themselves at the mercy of both the mob and the studio's fixers, who often worked in tandem to keep scandals out of the headlines and profit from the cover-up. Some say it was Rosselli's files, not just his muscle, that made him untouchable. What set Rosselli apart was his ability to remain invisible. He didn't want credit or publicity. He wanted leverage and a steady stream of cash. Even the FBI struggled to pin anything on him, noting his uncanny knack for slipping through surveillance and vanishing witnesses. The studios, for their part, were content to pretend he didn't exist. So long as the lights stayed on, the cameras kept rolling, and the money flowed. In the end, Johnny Rosselli embodied the paradox of Golden Age Hollywood. The movies sold dreams of justice and glamour, but behind the scenes, real power belonged to men like Rosselli, who understood that a well-timed threat could buy more loyalty than a dozen contracts. His story is rarely told on screen, yet without him, the studio's golden era might have been nothing but a fantasy, a fragile illusion, one phone call from collapse. 3. Nick Shank. Most movie fans have never heard the name Nick Shank, but for nearly 3 decades, he held the real keys to the kingdom of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. While stars glittered under the California sun, and studio bosses like Louis B. Mayer put on a show for the press, Shank ruled from a distance, an East Coast kingpin whose reputation for tough dealing and mob connections gave him a shadowy grip on Hollywood's largest dream factory. In a business obsessed with fantasy, Shank was the unblinking face of reality, profit, power, and absolute control, no matter what it took. Born to Russian Jewish immigrants in the late 19th century, Shank started his empire in the most unlikely place, New York's penny arcades and Nickelodeons. Alongside his brother, he quickly learned the value of spectacle and the profit hiding in the margins. But while his rivals focused on movie stars and red carpets, Shank looked for leverage. That meant building relationships with the men who really kept the city running, union bosses, politicians, and, when needed, the mob. By the 1920s, Shank controlled Loews Inc., the parent company of MGM, and a sprawling network of movie theaters across America. On paper, Louis B. Mayer was the boss in Hollywood. In reality, every decision at MGM flowed through Shank's New York office. He installed Mayer to run the Los Angeles studio, but he never fully trusted him, dispatching watchdogs like Eddie Mannix to make sure the West Coast never forgot who signed the checks. Studio heads might bluster, but Shank's word was law. Shank's ruthlessness was legendary. If labor unions threatened a strike, he'd negotiate, but always with muscle standing just out of sight. If a rival theater chain got in the way, Shank would leverage his mob connections to apply pressure, sometimes through accidents, sometimes through threats. His network of contacts in the New York underworld made sure that Loews and MGM never suffered the labor unrest and sabotage that plagued their competitors. In a city where unions and organized crime were sometimes indistinguishable, Shank played both sides with expert skill. But his tactics weren't limited to brute force. Shank was a master manipulator who understood the value of loyalty and fear. He rewarded those who played by his rules and destroyed those who didn't. Executives who crossed him could find their careers ruined overnight, blacklisted from the industry. His control over theater chains meant that even independent producers had to cut deals with Shank or see their films vanish into obscurity. Mayer might have been Hollywood's father figure, but Shank was the silent godfather, watching from 3,000 miles away. In later years, as the studio system began to crumble under antitrust lawsuits and shifting audience tastes, Shank's grip on MGM weakened. But for a generation, he exemplified the dark side of Hollywood's golden age, a studio owner who borrowed mob tactics to enforce order, amass wealth, and make sure that, in the end, it was always the men behind the curtain who wrote the script. His legacy is a reminder that Hollywood magic has always been paid for in secrets, and sometimes in blood. 4. Harry Cohen. If you were an actress on the Columbia Pictures lot in the 1930s or 1940s, you knew one thing above all: don't cross Harry Cohen. Nicknamed King Cohen behind his back and the meanest man in Hollywood to his face, Cohen didn't just run Columbia Pictures, he ruled it like a mobster lord over his territory. His reign spanned nearly 4 decades, and with every passing year, his legend grew more infamous. Columbia may have started as a struggling Poverty Row outfit, but under Cohen's iron grip, it became one of the most profitable and feared studios in Hollywood. Harry Cohen wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He was the son of a Jewish tailor from New York's Lower East Side, a street fighter who clawed his way up from the slums to the corner office. He spoke in a growl, walked with a swagger, and ran his studio with a mixture of charm, rage, and relentless intimidation. Cohen's business acumen was undeniable. He could spot talent, strike a deal, and squeeze profit from a stone. But it was his darker talents that made him legendary. He demanded absolute loyalty and obedience, using tactics that would make a mob boss proud: threats, blackmail, sexual coercion, and an ever-present network of spies on the lot. Cohen's office overlooked the entire Columbia Pictures compound, and he kept it that way for a reason. Employees knew that Cohen could be listening at any time. His offices and sets were wired with microphones and intercoms, ready to catch any whisper of dissent or disrespect. If an actor, director, or even a secretary so much as questioned his authority, they might be summoned for one of Cohen's infamous tirades, or worse, find themselves out of work, their careers evaporating overnight. But it was Columbia's female talent who suffered the most under Cohen's rule. He developed a predatory reputation for exploiting actresses desperate for a break, wielding contracts as bait and favors as the cost of entry. Rita Hayworth, Columbia's greatest star, owed her career to Cohen, but also endured relentless harassment and threats when she refused his advances. Others, like Kim Novak, found themselves similarly trapped, their personal lives policed, and their careers manipulated to suit Cohen's whims. When Kim Novak left him for Sammy Davis Jr., Cohen's fury was so great that he allegedly called in mob contacts to handle the singer, an order that, according to some, may have resulted in a real hit being placed on Davis. Despite, or perhaps because of, his brutality, Columbia Pictures thrived. Cohen's iron fist kept the studio out of labor trouble. His rumored mob connections ensured that union racketeers and labor strikes were handled quietly, if not always legally. He was feared by rivals and subordinates alike, so much so that at his funeral in 1958, legend has it, hundreds of Hollywood bigwigs showed up not out of love or respect, but to make sure the king was truly dead. Harry Cohen's legacy is one of contradiction, a visionary who made stars, but a tyrant who left a trail of broken dreams and silent victims in his wake. He was the boss you didn't dare cross, a studio head who brought the underworld's playbook to Hollywood and made it work in the bright, unforgiving lights of show business. Shank Mickey Cohen. To the casual observer, Mickey Cohen was just another sharply dressed character haunting the golden streets of Los Angeles. But beneath the flashy suits and ever-present press, Cohen was the city's real boss, an underworld kingpin whose empire sprawled from seedy nightclubs to the gilded gates of Hollywood's most powerful studios. For a time, Mickey Cohen didn't own a studio in the literal sense. Instead, he owned the city that made the movies, and everyone who wanted to make it in Tinseltown knew it. Cohen's journey to the top of Hollywood's criminal ladder was pure American grit, with more than a little violence thrown in. Born to a Russian Jewish immigrant family, he grew up hustling on the streets, first as a newsboy, then as a boxer, and finally as a hired gun for the East Coast mob. By the late 1930s, Cohen had become Los Angeles's preeminent mobster, inheriting the empire built by the legendary Bugsy Seagull. What set Cohen apart was his flair for publicity. He courted the press, posed for photos, and threw lavish parties, making himself as much a local celebrity as the film stars he shook down. But beneath the surface, charm was a ruthless business mind. Hollywood studios, flush with box office cash and desperate to avoid trouble, soon found themselves in Cohen's sights. He ran gambling dens that catered to both stars and executives, all while providing protection for anyone who needed a problem solved or a scandal kept out of the papers. If a studio boss needed to silence a nosy reporter, Cohen could make a call. If a star found themselves entangled in blackmail or debt, Cohen had the muscle and connections to fix it for a price. Cohen's influence ran even deeper through Hollywood's unions. Alongside his partners in organized crime, he controlled the projectionists, stagehands, and teamsters who kept the studios running. When contract negotiations threatened to stall a multi-million-dollar production, it was Cohen's goons who applied pressure. Studios quickly learned that paying Cohen's fees was cheaper and safer than fighting the unions. In a city where time was money, Cohen controlled the clock. His connections reached every corner of the entertainment world. Nightclubs like Slapsy Maxie's, partly owned by Cohen, became a who's who of Hollywood nightlife. Stars, producers, and moguls rubbed shoulders with gangsters and politicians, trading secrets and favors in smoky back rooms. Cohen's files on his Hollywood clientele, filled with secrets and scandals, gave him leverage that even the studios couldn't buy. Rumors swirled about his involvement in rigging awards, fixing contracts, and quietly removing threats to the city's golden image. Cohen's reign was violent as it was lucrative. Assassination attempts, shootouts, and high-profile arrests kept his name in the papers, but he always managed to slip away, either through bribes, fear, or sheer bravado. He embodied the underbelly of the Hollywood dream, the idea that in a town built on illusion, sometimes the man who controlled the shadows had more power than those in the spotlight. In the end, Mickey Cohen never needed to put his name on a studio lot. His true domain was the nervous heart of Hollywood itself, a city forever looking over its shoulder. While the cameras rolled and stars smiled for the fans, it was Cohen's approval and his threats that could make or break the men and women behind the curtain. 6. Bugsy Seagull. In Hollywood, few names evoke as much fascination and fear as Bugsy Seagull. He was the gangster who gave Las Vegas its neon soul, but before that, Seagull was already a legend on the sun-drenched streets of Los Angeles, operating in the shadows of the movie business. To film fans, Seagull might sound like a side character in a noir thriller, but to the power players of Golden Age Hollywood, he was a real-life force, equal parts charmer, bully, and kingmaker. Benjamin Bugsy Seagull arrived in Los Angeles in the 1930s as the mob's man on the West Coast, sent by the infamous Luciano and Lansky syndicate to oversee gambling, bootlegging, and racketeering. But Bugsy wasn't content to stay in the background. He was drawn to the lights, the celebrities, and the spectacle of Hollywood, quickly making himself indispensable to everyone, from studio executives to screen sirens. Seagull's nightclubs, like the legendary Clover Club and the Trocadero, became after-dark sanctuaries where actors, directors, and producers mingled with gangsters, politicians, and out-of-town mob bosses. Seagull's power in Hollywood wasn't built on studio ownership. Instead, it was his control over the city's nightlife, gambling, and illicit pleasures that gave him true authority. Studio bosses and stars both flocked to his clubs for after-hours deals, off-the-record negotiations, and the kind of fun that couldn't be found under the glare of the studio lights. If a producer needed quick financing, Seagull could provide it at a price. If a star found themselves threatened by blackmail or unwanted attention, Seagull's men could persuade the problem to disappear. In Hollywood, whispers about Bugsy's reach were everywhere. Some claimed he helped rig film contracts, others that he fixed the odds at Oscar night gambling tables, and still others insisted he'd quietly arranged to ruin rival productions with a few well-placed threats. For the men who ran the studios, Seagull was both a solution and a risk. He provided protection against labor unrest and union trouble, a real threat in an era when organized crime controlled many of the entertainment industry's key unions. The price was steep, but most considered it a bargain compared to the cost of a crippling strike or a public scandal. Seagull also played the press, cultivating relationships with Hollywood's most influential columnists, ensuring that stories ran or didn't according to his wishes. And if someone refused to play along, Seagull's reputation for violence served as an unspoken warning. Nothing in Hollywood was worth crossing the mob. His charm was legendary, but it was underpinned by the menace of sudden violence. Seagull was the kind of man who could share a drink with a starlet one night and order a beating the next if he felt disrespected. He was rumored to have intimidated entire studios, leveraging his mob contacts to manipulate studio heads who thought they were untouchable. By the time Seagull was murdered in 1947, his legend had already become intertwined with Hollywood's own mythos, a cautionary tale of what happens when organized crime and organized fantasy collide. To this day, his ghost haunts Hollywood's past, a reminder that, in the golden age, even the brightest stars could find themselves in the shadow of a man like Bugsy Seagull. In the shadows of Hollywood's most glittering era, true power often wore a different face. The mobsters and fixers who infiltrated the studios changed the course of movies and lives without ever stepping in front of a camera. Their legacies linger in whispered rumors, lost careers, and stories too wild for even the silver screen. As the credits roll on this chapter, remember, in Golden Age Hollywood, the biggest stars sometimes answered men who never needed their names in lights.